Welcome to the Hidden Orchard podcast, a radical exploration of spirituality, science, and the Bible from a Jewish perspective. Each week we'll look at a new topic and dive deep into the texts that inspire and enrich our lives. So whether you're a seasoned expert or just curious about a topic, there's something for everyone. So sit back, relax, and we'll get to today's episode in a bit. But first, if you haven't done so, visit thehiddenorchard.com and subscribe. It's free, and you'll receive access to content and weekly emails. There you can also subscribe for a paid membership and get access to everything on the site and be the first to hear about online study opportunities where you can meet and interact with other people on the journey. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you have an idea for a topic, reach out to me at thehiddenorchard.com. Now, let's get to today's episode. In this series, we're challenging the assumption that the Jewish oral tradition, also known as the Oral Torah, is irrelevant to biblical understanding and application. We've looked at a few different examples of this, and in this episode we're going to explore the deeper insight into Daniel's dietary problems in Babylon and the origins of his solution. Around the year 605 BCE, Daniel, along with his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, found themselves exiled from the Holy Land, forced to live amid a pagan empire. Now, remaining Torah observant in exile would become an enduring issue for Jews in later centuries. Daniel and his friends found themselves in a relatively new reality with unique challenges. Particularly, it was the idolatrous world of Nebuchadnezzar's palace that provided significant challenges for observant Jews. On the one hand, the food was plentiful, extravagant, and diverse. On the other, it was mostly forbidden according to the Torah. This would be no problem for those who ascribe to the idea of biblically kosher, a perspective that disregards Jewish tradition and insight, opting to uphold a few prohibitions at a categorical level. Adherence to this idea would simply avoid the obvious foods like pork and shellfish, but the rest would be fair game. Now, the concept of biblical kosher represents a newer approach, one separate from the teachings of the Torah, and one foreign from the apostolic influence. This is an issue because it does not include the dimension of spiritual defilement, a significant aspect of the Jewish dietary laws. And the Jewish dietary laws, for those who are unfamiliar, go under the category named kashrut. And the word kosher is related to this word. So what was Daniel's problem with the food in Babylon? The text indicates that the avoidance of defilement was among his primary concerns. Daniel 1:8 says, Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the king's food or the wine he drank, so he sought permission of the chief officer not to defile himself. So we see this word mentioned twice in the text. The kind of defilement in reference is what we'll call spiritual. It's acquired through participation in and or the consumption of food and drink involved in idolatrous rituals. The result of contact with these is a kind of spiritual short-circuiting that sabotages one's holiness, and it causes separation from the Creator. Daniel proposed an interesting solution to avoid this outcome, that they would only eat vegetables and drink water. This idea, of course, inspired the Daniel Plan, a dietary trend made popular by evangelical pastor Rick Warren, seeking to infuse biblical wisdom into modern dietary practices. Yet many are likely unaware that Daniel's solution seems to have originated from within the Jewish oral tradition. We might ask, where did Daniel get this idea that vegetables, ostensibly raw vegetables, would help him avoid the problem of defilement? The suggestion seems at first merely ascetic, but beneath this idea lies a thread of wisdom that, to me, reveals an already operative Jewish oral tradition, active in his time. The written Torah specifically forbids the consumption of meat sacrificed to idols, and we see this in Exodus 34:15. In Deuteronomy 12:21, the Torah lays down the foundations of kosher slaughter, adding another complexity to meat. This may be easier to maintain when you live in ancient Israel. However, the specifics of navigating a foreign food system, where much of the supply chain is tainted by some degree of contact with idolatry, now that's complicated. Even today, in exile, discerning the permissible from the forbidden remains a persistent challenge. Leaders have to figure these things out as food formulations and ingredients change on a near weekly basis, especially in the West. From our article on Haggai's quiz, another in this series, we already see that some degree of purity observance was in place during the late exilic period. But where did Daniel find the clarity to refuse? How did he know that vegetables offered a path to purity? The Jewish tradition maintains that the Oral Torah was put into play as far back as the giving of the Torah, and some assert as far back as Adam, at least elements of it. We see the traces of an operative oral tradition in the early pages of the Torah. For example, one that many point to is the differentiation between clean and unclean animals in the time of Noah. The sages of later centuries would codify such principles into the Mishnah and later the Talmud, detailing the laws of kashrut and the prohibitions against food connected to idolatry. Daniel's choice reveals that these ideas were not new inventions of the rabbinic era. They were ancient and alive and active in the 6th century BCE. According to the Torah's standards, the meat in Babylon would have almost certainly failed the standards of ritual slaughter, shechita. For example, lacking the removal of forbidden fats and blood mandated by Leviticus would likely have not been a part of the slaughtering of this meat. Also, it was highly likely to have been dedicated to Marduk or Ishtar or other gods beforehand, rendering it completely impure, spiritually and physically, and off limits. Wine also posed a significant risk, not just of idolatry, but of social entanglement that comes from being impaired when one drinks too much of it. The Talmudic tractate Avodah Zarah includes extensive commentary on the potential problems of wine and the various opinions on how to mitigate these issues. And trust me, they were not simple or clear-cut. So why vegetables? Unblemished by contact with various cooking utensils, uncooked vegetables required no slaughter and had little chance of compromise. Outside of the land of Israel, they were also subject to fewer Torah stipulations than food grown within the land. Except for a few specific foods, uncooked vegetables were not subject to the risks of impurity and transferred through heat, and nor were they mixed with other non-kosher substances. In addition, they weren't cooked by pagans, a categorical prohibition known as bishul akum. Another stipulation of bishul akum is to avoid foods that are fit for a king's table. The text in Daniel directly correlates these solutions with this issue. To me, this signals that Daniel's solution was not guesswork. As a highly observant Jew, he relied on a halakhic solution to a problematic situation. It was pragmatic, and one that we see traces of in the apostolic community and the early church community as it emerged in the 1st and 2nd century. The result? So the Hebrew text reads, Marhem Tov, their appearance was good, which may hint at more than simply physical health. It speaks of spiritual vitality, alignment with the Creator. In fact, that's how the rest of the story goes. Daniel's very plugged into the Creator. He's interacting in the spiritual worlds. And had they simply relied on the standards of biblically kosher, history might have taken a different turn, and we would have never heard the story of Daniel. Further, Daniel's solution was not a one-dimensional plan for physical health, but one that preserved holiness, maintaining his connection with the Ruach HaKodesh. This challenges the notion that the Jewish oral tradition was a later innovation of rabbinic origin, after the destruction of the Second Temple, 70 CE. Again, we're seeing very early on in the texts, in the Bible itself, the evidence of the Jewish oral tradition. And as always, the tradition has maintained the Torah was never given alone. It came with its oral aspect, a necessary component, still useful to navigate the gray spaces even in our day. That's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed this topic. Remember, you can find more information at thehiddenorchard.com. If you liked what you heard, please leave a review and share this podcast with your friends. We don't really engage in marketing, so it's word of mouth and references like that really help spread the word. Also, I want to say thank you to those who subscribe to the site and those who support the Hidden Orchard Project financially. Without you, it wouldn't be possible, so thank you. Thanks to everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.